I've had people afterwards that have seen this. Oh,
Yeah, no, I think we get a good following. So, all right. So
very good.
we are coming live. This is Mark Malloy with Emerging Revolutionary War. Glad to be joined tonight by author and historian Mike Cecere, who published a book not too long ago about the service of Light Horse Harry Lee called Wedded to My Sword, the Revolutionary War service of Light Horse Harry Lee. And we were just talking just briefly before this. As I mentioned, or we came live to you, me and Rob Orrison, earlier this week from the place behind me, Stratford Hall, which was for a time the home of Light Horse Harry Lee. Light Horse Harry Lee's probably most famous to, or most people who have gotten anything about him in their history classes usually hear that he was a Revolutionary War hero and that he was the father of Robert E. Lee, and came up with the quote for George Washington as "first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen." But that's pretty much the one line you will read about him in any sort of generic general history or the general public often gets. And his whole service during the Revolution, I think, is often overlooked. And so I'm excited to be able to spend an evening just talking about his service during the Revolution. And I guess that's my first question for Mike would be why you decided to write a book focused on Light Horse Harry Lee.
Mark, thank you for having me again. I'm thrilled at the opportunity to talk about Henry Lee. He is an amazing character. And why I chose to write about him, because there are biographies, full-scale biographies on him out there, but they were pretty old. They were pretty dated. And I really wanted to focus more on his military career, which I felt didn't get a full focus on. And so I went overboard and just focused on that and kind of, I mean, from his early life and then his military career. And I really just summed up the post-war years. So it's not a complete biography. But why him? Because I lived 5 miles from his birthplace, and for like 25 years when I was in Northern Virginia in Prince William County. And it's now a state park called Leesylvania State Park, which I always found a weird name, but I guess Pennsylvania, woods of Penn, Leesylvania means the woods of Lee. And it turns out that this park, which most people view as a recreational area for cookouts and those kind of activities, is also a historic site. And it's not like what's behind you, Mark. Like Stratford Hall is a beautiful place. Leesylvania is a beautiful place, but there's really nothing there. There's no remnants of Henry Lee Jr., I should say. I think he was the third. There's no remnants of his house, although you can go to the site where it stood. And so I would do that a lot. I'd walk my dog there. Of course, there's, as you know, there's Civil War history there too. It was a artillery position on the Potomac River. It's right on the Potomac River. So having this historic site so close just made me curious about Henry Lee, his father, who nobody has any recollection of. That would be the grandfather of Robert E. Lee, of course, and then Light Horse Harry. So I started digging a little bit, and I said, "Whoa, this guy's got an amazing story." And then off to the races I went.
Yeah. So and you mentioned the Lee family of Virginia. I feel like it's probably one of the most prominent families in Virginia. And at the you have Richard Henry Lee, Francis Lightfoot. There's a whole lot of Lees.
And they are connected.
Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult to find all the connections, just because a lot of times it's more like a family bush than a family
It
tree.
sure is. It sure is.
So many connections.
Now there is one important Rev War Lee that's not blood related to any of the Lees, and you know it is. It's Charles. People should know that General Charles Lee, and yet our Lee, Harry Lee, is going to have a run-in with Charles, a very positive run-in at Mount Vernon, and in fact, his whole destiny could have been along a different line if something had happened differently. I'll tell you about that when we get to it, but yeah, you're absolutely right. There's all kinds of Lees, the Lightfoot, Francis Lightfoot and Richard Henry Lee, and they're all connected. They're definitely all connected.
Yeah, and Light Horse Harry Lee is a young man when the war breaks out. So he's born in the 1750s. So he's only about what, like 20 years old, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, he's born in 1756. He goes to well, what is now Princeton? What was it? College of New Jersey back then, Nassau Hall.
Yep,
So he's
yep.
there from 71 to 73. There's actually a little snippet in the Virginia Gazette about a speech. I guess he won an award for an oration. One of his brothers were there too. And so he was noted as a scholar. He was recognized as a scholar. And the plan was to send him to England before all the revolution really spun out of control. But the original, he's the oldest son of 8 children. So he was going to be sent off to England for the law and all that. And then the revolution kind of interfered. And you're right. If in 1775, Charles Lee, who's only been future general, who's only been in the country for what, a couple of years, is kind of doing a tour and meeting prominent folks, and he's at Mount Vernon, and Henry Lee happens to be there with his father, and they meet and they talk with Colonel Washington at the time, because it's 75. It's April 75, and Charles Lee, and that's where Light Horse Harry Lee gets the idea. I want to be with this guy. I want to be an aide de camp with this guy. Right. And so right up until, and then a year goes by and all the activities, and he's still in Virginia, and he writes a letter to Charles Lee saying, I really would like to, something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing completely, but I'd like to serve and all. And about 2 weeks later, before that letter even has any impact, Lee had written another letter that had got intercepted by the British. So Charles Lee didn't even know that Light Horse, the future Light Horse Harry, wanted to be an aide de camp. So now Lee writes that second letter, waits, and then Charles Lee is in Virginia and posts an announcement saying, "Wanted, gentlemen on horseback," so to speak, and we need cavalry, and we need you to step up. And so the 5th Virginia Convention took that idea and ran with it, and then formed 6 troops. A troop is what, 35 horses or so, cavalrymen, I should say. And so Lee, with no military experience, at the age of 20, is placed in command as a captain of a troop of horse in a relative's regiment. It was Bland, I think, right?
Theodoric Bland. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Theodoric Bland is the commander, and Lee, so he's got special traits, but by God, he hasn't proved anything on the military realm at all. I mean, his dad is the county lieutenant, so there might be a little bit of rub off there. Maybe he was an ensign in the militia or something. Maybe that's hard to document for sure, but there he is, 20 years old, and yet by the time before he's 26, he's going to have one of the most stellar records of anyone who served in the American Revolution on either side. Just an unbelievable record.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. When you just see the litany of things he does, it's just unbelievable. It's like, wow, this guy's, and in a way, he accomplishes his greatest accomplishments are done before he's 26, which is a little bit hard to deal with. You can imagine. We're older now. It's like,
I know. Oh, I think that's something with any of these figures. Whenever you're reading about them, their portraits often are done, 20 or 30 years later when they're older men. But these were very young. I mean, yeah, like you said, 20 years old, 26, he's doing all these exploits.
I can't believe it. It just, I know 20-year-olds now, and I can't see them 20, 21, 22. I mean, we share some of what he did. It's like, wow, he had the presence of mind to think of that.
Yeah, I know. Well, and that's interesting because I was going to ask you if he had any relationship with Washington before the war. So it sounds like he at least met him.
Yeah, through his father. In fact, Washington had stayed at Leesylvania several times on his travels back and forth from Williamsburg. It's in his diary. So several times they were both burgesses. Washington from Fairfax, and then Lee, Light Horse's father, from Prince William County.
Yeah,
so
okay.
He was a pretty prominent man himself. His dad in the government, in local government.
Yeah, okay. And then so he's in charge of a troop of cavalry.
That's what it starts out as. Yep.
And he's not going to be involved much in the northern theater of war in those first year or two, right?
Not in your time period up at
Yeah.
Trenton. He misses that. But no, but he does show up within a month. He shows up in January. They're ordered north in December. See, they're formed in June, and they're organized right here in Williamsburg, where I'm at. And I think they turned the governor's palace into kind of they use part of it as a cavalry post and all, and some of the outbuildings as barracks, I suppose. And then they get their orders to go north. Washington needs cavalry, and so they show up in January. At what he was that was the encampment all around the Watchung Mountains and all that, all spread out.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So he joins up with Washington's army in January of 77.
Yep.
And then so what kind of I guess was he involved in much I guess he'll be involved at the Battle of Brandywine, right? Later that year.
Absolutely. The cavalry's kind of used in a reconnaissance way. And so the regiment, the cavalry regiment, I think it's the First Dragoons, I believe it's called, under Bland. They're all spread out. So Lee's action at Brandywine and Germantown is somewhat detached. He's not like a force of cavalry that's going to come storming, onto the battlefield. He's mostly, he's not engaged in any of the heavy fighting at all. He really, his first moment of prominence is at Valley Forge. It's a few weeks into Valley Forge. It's in January of 1778 now. So he's been up there for a year. And there is a great account in the New Jersey newspaper. It's a British account of how they're going to try to capture this guy because he's been such a nuisance in these lightning quick raids where I don't have the exact quote off the top of my head, but the essence of it was there's this guy named Lee who's commanding a troop of no more than 35 men, and who over the last since August, and they write this in January, since August has captured over 125 of our guys. I don't know how they word it, and so it turns out the British have an opportunity to catch him. It was I gotta look it up because it's been a while since it's at Scott's Farm. It's an internet. In fact, I saw Rob post something about it the other day on this. It was a good account of it. The story goes, his men are out doing their thing. He's at a post at a house, Scott's Farm, and that's kind of the headquarters. And some of his men have been sent on missions for the night. Basically, he and some of Daniel Morgan's riflemen were posted as a outer picket, so to speak, and constantly on guard. And a force of I think it was 80 British dragoons come storming in and kind of obviously wake everybody up at the house. But Lee, rather than panicking and surrendering, locks the door, barricades, gets everybody at the window. And then literally, this is right out of a Bugs Bunny cartoon or something. Literally, Lee has the few men he has in the window, fire from a window, then load and run and go to another window, fire from that window, go and load to another window, fire, and make it look like there's more men. And I know you're thinking, how do you source that? What is your source for that? It's General Washington's own account. Okay, General Washington makes a reference to judiciously posting his men, which is a way of saying they manned more windows than they had men. And basically there was even taunting. It was even taunting when the British started to burn down the outbuildings. Lee, there's a quote. I have a quote of him basically taunting the commander, basically saying, "Come, you can do better." Now the British are, deep outside their lines and close to the Americans, so they can't stay there that long. So they decide, oh, it's getting too late. We can't get him. He won't surrender. Boom, and they leave. And so Lee survives, and he gets recognized in general orders the next day by General Washington.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a great little. What is he? 21. That's January, so he's not even 21 yet. He hasn't even turned 21.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Check that. He is 21. He hasn't turned 22 because it was January 78. Yeah. I'm off by.
So much different. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So that's
that's I think that's exemplative of some of his exploits, because I think he's involved in a lot of smaller actions
oh yeah, yeah.
after war.
The story. I just realized the story. There's still another connection to this. The title of the book, "Wedded to My Sword," comes from this incident, the tail end of this incident, because Washington is so impressed by Lee and his actions, he offers him a position in Washington's family, as an aide de camp.
Mhm.
And Lee is tormented by this because he knows it's such an honor and all. So he's like torn, but he's really digging the action. He really enjoys the fight, the glory. So he writes this letter that we have to Washington declining the offer, and he uses the phrase, "I am wedded to my sword." And as soon as I saw it, I went, "That's a title. That's a title right there." I love quotes.
Well,
So,
and
and
that's
then
I think that's that Alexander Hamilton has a similar torn position of
sure, glory.
military glory on the field of battle versus being by Washington's side through everything.
Yep, yep.
Must have been a difficult decision, but so he
Washington,
declined that.
he declined it, but Washington didn't hold it against him. In fact, he gave him 2 more troops to command. So now he has, when I say troop, so now he has 3 sections of horse, which is a little weird and probably caused a lot of tension with his relative, Colonel Bland, who was this upstart cousin, the second cousin of mine, who's, getting his own independent command. That's what it is. It becomes an independent command.
When does it become Lee's Legion? Is that not until later when
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
being sent out?
That's right before he comes down south. Before
Okay.
we get to Lee's Legion in '79, he has an amazing encounter at Paulus Hook. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That
And
that
the event at Paulus Hook, I know he gets struck a medal from Congress for his
yeah,
action there. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
figure
They
it had
both.
to be pretty substantial what he did there.
It is. There's Unfortunately, it's impossible to go to any place resembling it now. It's right on the Hudson River in New Jersey. And I think it's in Jersey City now is where it's located. And what it was a British outpost, pretty much about a mile and a half, I believe, across the river from the tip of Manhattan Island. So it was like a little peninsula, and at low tide, you could walk by land, and at high tide, it flooded. So it was pretty much a castle with a moat. So you had to time your attack. We were talking about Fort Sumter before, and how people would go out there, but you could walk out there and get stuck out there at
Yeah.
high tide. The same thing. So everything was, and remember, they were launching. Lee actually came to Washington with the idea, and then Washington gave Lee, and he matched him up with a whole lot of infantry. So it was Lee's cavalry. He still just had cavalry, and then a large force of infantry too. And they marched from like Hackensack or something, and marched all the way down, and they fell behind schedule. And Lee, there's Lee. One of the things about Laversary Lee that we're really lucky about is he left these memoirs that not always perfect sources, but at least they give you a good idea. And so um, when he's right, he now of course most of what he does, I shouldn't have brought that up at this one because that wasn't a great source for this. We got a lot of his letters for the source. The memoirs are better, as you know, for later in the war from 80 and 81. But in any case, we've got plenty of his accounts of everything that happened, what he was thinking. When he fell behind, he decided we got to rush on now. And he gets there, and the gate's unguarded. This is like an unbelievably difficult uh, position to attack. So the British they just don't expect anybody to even try it. And apparently they do have a patrol out. Lee comes storming on in. They had to wade up through their chest through water at one point to get into the fort. They easily get into the fort. They capture a lot of guys. They capture most of the kind of blockhouses but one. And then they basically decide we got to go. This is just a raid. This is not like we're going to hold this thing. And so they head on out of there. And it's pandemonium, right? And he makes it all the way back. He was supposed to meet boats on his way back, but he was so far behind that the guys with the boats figured he's not coming, and they left him. So, and by the way, when all this happened, he woke up the entire city of New York City.
Mhm.
because the shooting on the island sparked the alarm guns in New York City to go off, which meant the entire British Army in New York's like, what's going on? What's going on? So he has to get past them, going up coast of New Jersey before he's cut off by the British. He barely makes it, and so that's when the news of this gets out, Congress is like, geez, you're amazing. Here's a medal.
Yeah.
And then almost the same day he gets an order for his arrest. He was court-martialed. He was court-martialed by, I'm afraid to say, other Virginia officers, some of who I really admire, who felt two things. First, his whole attack was kind of rational, but more important, there was jealousy. It was all about jealousy. And it turns out he was not the ranking officer, commission-wise. I think it was, I want to say Clark, Major Clark. Yeah, I think it was Major Clark. I could be wrong about that. Might be Major Green. But whoever the infantry commander was actually outranked him. But ironically, even that guy said, I don't mind. He took charge. It was his plan. And so the court martial completely exonerated him. That's the second court martial he had, by the way.
Really?
I forgot to mention the first one where I think his cousin, his relative, brought him up for insubordination, and he was exonerated for that. So he's completely acquitted. When you read the results there, the officers at the Paulus Hook court martial basically dismiss it with prejudice. This is with disdain. This is ridiculous.
Really?
and Washington, you know how Washington is. He never wants to show any sort of partiality. So he did behind the scenes try to squelch this thing, but couldn't do it. And so he had to kind of sit tight until it played itself through. But
Yeah.
Washington was clearly on Lee's side in all this. Yeah, what a again, we're only a third of the way through the story.
Yeah. No, it's a lot. I mean, I think it's interesting too. I mean, you just mentioned, being court-martialed for insubordination. Yeah, I think, he could rub some people the wrong way. And one of the interesting stories in the book that I thought was interesting is, he was in '79. I guess he's having a lot of problems with desertion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
He's got
you
the
wanna,
solution. So,
yeah.
so
I
he
mean, I think
writes,
it was, I hadn't read anything or I hadn't heard a story like this from the Revolutionary War before. That Lee's solution to was, well, you take the deserter, execute them, chop off their head, put it on a pike, and that's a warning to anybody else to try and do that.
that was Lee's proposal. It's written down in the Washington papers. You can see it right there. And then Washington's little reply, like, yeah, it's like that guy from the one of those movies. Yeah. I don't think so. But the rest of the story is it was too late, right? He'd already executed his plan. He'd already did that to a deserter. And Washington writes back something along the lines of, be sure to tell, he's Major Lee now, because he's been promoted too. Be sure to tell Major Lee to bury the person in question with as little fanfare as possible. Just let's not let anybody know we did this. Is basically the message I got out of that.
Yep. Yeah. No. I think Washington says, if the enemy is to get to learn about this, they'll quickly use it for propaganda, basically. So, what inhumane brutes the Americans are.
Hey, he's 24 years old at the time, so 24-year-olds do little rash things.
Yeah, no. So Lee's so after Paulus Hook, so now he's rising in prominence. Now he fights well he's at the Battle of Springfield, I believe.
Yes. And that's a Nathaniel Greene battle too, I believe.
Yeah.
So they fight, and he fights well there. That in the summer of 1780, and then of course, whoa, is that right? Yeah, 1780, right? Because I got confused. The Virginians are all gone, but he's a dragoon, so he's still up there. And then by November of 80, remember all that stuff going on in the South that you well know, down in Charleston and all that. General Washington decides to send. Now it's Lieutenant Colonel Henry Lee with a legion.
And now is it we did get a question from Rob Fryer of whether when he gets the name Light Horse Harry. Do you know if that's something that he gets during the war, or is that something that's a post-war thing?
Oh, I should have checked my notes. I forgot that one. I think what I found was it's a post-war. I don't recall ever seeing that phrase used in his lifetime. All right. I think it was the closest I could track it down to was Washington Irving in like 1839. I think I'd have to look again because I do address it in the book. I'm pretty sure I do. Because it's obviously a question that were people calling him Light Horse. It's such a unique nickname and all that. But
Yeah.
I am pretty sure that it was never. I don't recall ever seeing it ever referenced as part of his, calling him during his lifetime Light Horse Harry Lee.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, no. I figure it's probably something, I mean, obviously at the time they were probably just calling him, Lieutenant Colonel Lee or whatever. But yeah, no.
And they might even use the phrase Light Horse, the commander of Light Horse,
Mm-hmm.
a Light Horse, dragoons, Light Dragoons.
But that phrase does come about because of his service, with the horse, with the cavalry.
Absolutely. And he's already deserved it, but now comes round two. The second act, which is even more impressive than the first.
Yeah. So he goes south. Now he's going to be serving under Greene, right? When he goes down there.
Yeah.
So
Greene gets down there in December of 80, and then Light Horse Harry gets down there in January 81, and Greene immediately sends him off to Georgetown, South Carolina, toward that area, and he teams up with Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. And they stayed the lightning raid on Georgetown, which is a British outpost. Think of South Carolina. Think of it like, I don't know, like a hand, so to speak, like this. And there's Charleston, and they had a series of outposts. Well, there's really only 4 of them. Georgetown, Camden, 96, and I don't know, smaller ones in between. Mm-hmm. Those are the big 3, really. And so they hit the one on the east, on the coast. It was just a raid. They weren't going to try to hold it necessarily. Strike there and strike out. And then he gets caught up in the retreat. Not so much because Morgan's doing his thing in January out in Cowpens. Lee is actually attacking Georgetown a few days after Cowpens, I believe. And then he returns to Greene's army because you remember. Greene marches his army all the way up to Guilford Courthouse, and then they kind of rendezvous with Morgan's guys. Then the race to the Dan begins. The race to the Dan in February. That's Lee's next great thing, the race to the Dan, where he basically is involved with the rear guard, major presence in the rear guard there. And that's 4 days. In my mind, it's always 4 days. Some people like to think of it all from January and into February, mid-February. So he's able to kind of fend off. There's some pretty heroic things going on there as they withdraw to Virginia, hoping to find help. They get across the Dan River. It's still touchy. People don't realize. Everybody thinks once they get across the Dan River, they're okay. If you read Nathaniel Greene's letters, he's pretty demoralized. He's like, we'll probably still have to keep going. If Cornwallis crosses the horse crossing upriver, where it's shallow. Mm-hmm. But Cornwallis doesn't. And militia show up, and more are reportedly on the way. And within like a 2-day period, everything changes. And now Greene feels he's got the men to stand up to Cornwallis, and he goes out. And Cornwallis isn't running away; he's just moving, back into North Carolina. And then Greene comes after him, and then they do this dance for almost a month, really. Mm-hmm. Oh, but that's where Paulus Hacking comes in. You remember Paulus Hacking?
Yeah, no, I think that's first of all, I think this is a really interesting story because I think it's also brings into account, uniforms and what they're wearing. I think this is just a fascinating story because I think we tend to think that, the British were wearing red and the Americans were wearing blue or hunting shirts. But so, tell a story about what happened with.
Well, Lee's Legion was sharp. They were sharp dressed. They had these short green coats. and I guess probably buff or tannish. I don't know if they were trousers or breechers or what. I never always paid attention to the coats.
Yeah.
And they happen to be almost. They happen to look almost identical to Bannister Tarleton's green coats. All right. And so, when Green goes back into North Carolina, this is in February, late February now. Lee is allowed to kind of do his own thing, kind of reconnaissance wise, and he hooks up with General Pickens, and they're on the trail of Tarleton. They got information where they think they might be able to surprise Tarleton, so they're bearing down on Tarleton. The buddy Tarleton from history, from the Cowpens and all that. And in between them, they run into a Tory militia commanded by Colonel Pyle. And what happens is the Colonel Pyle and his men misidentified Lee's men. They assume they're Tarleton's, and Lee runs with it. And he keeps Pickens' guys behind the militia, and he basically has his own men, his dragoons, ride past. Well, that's what he does. He sends a messenger up to Colonel Paul saying, "Clear the road, we're coming through." All right, and so they do, and they're riding up past, on their horses, and all these guys, all these Tory militia are probably looking at him like, ooh, it's the British Legion, which, ironically, are just another bunch of Americans, right? They're not really British, but it's the British Legion. And Lee says his plan was to ride to the head of the column and then announce that they were prisoners. That, that's one version. There are several versions. Another kind of excuse was, I didn't have time for them. I was just trying to get past them. I kind of believe the first one. I was going to announce that they are now our prisoners, and then give them their parole or whatever and go after Tarleton. That's what he really wanted. Down the line, what started to happen is some of these guys in the Tory line started. I think I'm right about this. Yeah, it's the Tory lines who started looking, going, "Hey, wait a minute! I know these guys." Well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it was Lee's guys. I should have brushed up on this. But the guys in the back started to recognize each other, and they started realizing, "Hey, wait! They're not who they think they're pretending to be." And fighting broke out in the back. And what I always found was ironic is the vast majority of guys don't know what's going on. But as soon as the shooting started in the rear, then all of Lee's guys attacked. And you've got this ridiculous situation where the Pyle's Tories, which outnumber the dragoons, are basically throwing up their hands saying, "Don't shoot, we're on your side." And Lee's guys saying, "Yeah, we know," and they're hacking them down basically. And the Tories never offered any resistance, but they got slaughtered. That's why it's called Pyle's hacking. And a lot of people like to say this is revenge for Waxhaws. I don't know about that at the moment. Basically, it was very effective strategically because it's going to totally demoralize the Tories when word gets out of what happened. Lee was not able to catch Tarleton. That was his primary goal, was to catch Tarleton. This also gives him kind of a bloodthirsty kind of image among his enemies, people that don't like him. He went too far.
Yeah.
He argues that it was really out of his hands. It just kind of blew up.
Which is, it seems like it sounds exactly like Waxhaws in the sense that
Tarleton says
similar thing that kind of got out of control. But then Tarleton and his guys get this reputation as the bloody band and the butcher.
Exactly right.
But it's interesting. I do think that it exhibits that these kinds of events were happening on both sides, and you're right that the British Legion was made up of loyalists, and here you have now Lee's Legion. Also, it's all Americans and Americans fighting each other, which is really kind of the story of the whole war, especially in the South. It's like all over the place. A lot of
the unrealized story of the war. Absolutely, you're right.
Okay, so he doesn't capture Tarleton, but then he is going to be, he's involved in the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, though, right?
Yeah, they have another. He has another run in with Tarleton at what New Garden, I believe. But the fighting right before Guilford Courthouse, on a few miles outside of Guilford Courthouse, there's essentially a cavalry um, engagement out there in the morning, and so there's fighting there. And then Lee is actually, because Lee was supposed to be essentially the trip line for General Greene. He's with General Greene. General Greene's got 4,400 men now. Cornwallis has less than 2,000, but Cornwallis is coming on, and Greene decides, fine, I'm going to do what Morgan did. I'm going to put my men into lines, and so Lee is posted. He's posted in the front. The British are coming now, so they engage. There's some fighting there. They withdraw. He goes to the left flank of the first line. He's kind of an anchor. And then the British march down and attack in force. The first line pretty much crumbles pretty fast. The flanks do all right. Lee is now pulling back. And what happens is some of the first line, the North Carolinians that were pretty much closest to Lee and Lee's men, they get kind of pushed off to it would be the American left, British right, and they have their own little battle going on in the woods, right, against Hessians and all that. And the main fight's happening here. And this is where Lee sometimes gets faulted, because what happens at one point, Lee's instructions were to essentially be at the first line and end up at the third line, right, on the flanks of the third line. And so he gets kind of pushed away, and he's in a pitch battle. And eventually what happens is he finds an opportunity to disengage, and he does, and he leaves those infantry and riflemen, including Virginia riflemen, Campbell's riflemen. He leaves them still fighting. I think he thinks they can handle their own. But Tarleton has been sent over to help. And he, whether Lee leaves and knows that Tarleton is there, or he leaves and then Tarleton shows up, is unclear. But what happens next is those poor American infantrymen are caught, and they are not happy with Lee, for leaving them. And Lee can't do anything in the third line anyway. It's the Marylanders and all that have done a great job, but they're not going to hold. So everybody retreats. But that's Guilford Courthouse. And then what happens, of course, the two sides separate, and then Cornwallis decides to come up here, and Greene decides to stay down there. And then what he does is this kind of systematic, plucking, so to speak, of outpost after outpost after outpost. And again, Lee and Francis Marion team up. Lee's Legion and Francis Marion and his militia team up, and they go after Fort Watson, Fort Mott. They're firing freaking flaming arrows out of muskets. It's crazy. Fort Granby, which I think is in Columbia, and Fort Galpin, which was over in Augusta, right? So they're doing all this fighting on their own, right? Greene is over at Hobkirk Hill, and then he ends up at 96, and Lee ends up in June joining him at 96, and they do a siege for a while. And 96, because you're now down there. And then when Greene finally decides, I gotta attack now because time's running out and reinforcements are coming, Lee is given the outpost, the western kind of outpost to attack. Greene and his main army attacks the main Star Redoubt. They don't make it, but Lee captures his redoubt and basically sends a message, I'm in, where are you? Or not something like that. And then Greene has to withdraw. So all that, I know I'm for sure for time, I'm rushing through all this, but each one of those things has little stories to go with it. It's just, holy crap, 25 years old and he's doing all this stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And then I think one of his last major battles is Utah Springs. He's going to be there for that, right?
Yep, he's at Utah Springs in September.
Yep. And then so he's in the thick of that. And then I think there's some sort of falling out between him and Nathaniel Greene, because I think after that he's going to end leaving. What happened?
Well, at Utah Spring, remember, you got William Washington there too. Another cavalry commander. You got two great Virginia cavalry commanders at Utah Spring. Washington had been at Cowpens as well, and at Guilford for that matter. But after the Battle of Utah Springs, ended up like all of Greene's battles being technically a loss. He withdrew from the field. He didn't really capture or gain the objective he had sought. He bloodied up the British pretty bad and all, but he withdrew. And when Greene wrote his letter, his kind of report, and he cited a lot of different individuals, the Light Horse Harry Lee felt shunned. He felt neglected. And he writes this letter to Greene talking about almost like a betrayal letter. Like, how could you do that? And then he leaves. He goes home. He gets permission, of course, but he goes home to write perhaps where you are at that point, because living at that place right there at Stratford Hall is a girl named Matilda, I believe. That while he's away, see, he goes back to Virginia. He does at Yorktown, but not in command or involved in anything. He's just kind of there as an officer, shows up and observes and all. But it's a siege anyway, so it's not really his bag of tea. But he goes and he starts courting Matilda, and he's getting letters from Greene. And there's several letters where Greene basically is very apologetic, saying, if I have done anything, said anything to offend you, I apologize. I meant no offense. This was a big mystery, and it remains a big mystery to me. It's like, why was he so sensitive about this? And he did get some criticism for his conduct at Utah Springs. So I confess that, but I don't think it was significant. It certainly wasn't anything that he couldn't handle from similar to earlier criticism. So I don't know. Maybe post-traumatic exhaustion, if there's such a thing. I mean, he'd been through a lot. I challenge anyone to find somebody with a similar record in that short time period, pretty much January to September, the number of engagements he was in, and the stuff that he saw as a 25-year-old. Still only 25 at that time.
No, that's fascinating, and it's interesting, because it's interesting his relationship with Greene too, because I believe one of his, I think his child he has shortly thereafter, he's going to name Nathaniel Greene Lee, and then I think the child dies young, and then later on in life, towards the end of his life, Lee's going to actually end up passing away, staying at the home of Nathaniel Greene's daughter.
Down in Georgia. Yep.
Yeah, which is really interesting how they're, and some of it might be because Nathaniel Greene dies. He dies just a couple years after the war, anyways. So maybe they never had the opportunity to reconcile or whatever. But but it seems like he even though he kind of leaves in a huff. It seems like he speaks apparently highly of Greene later on.
Yes, he does. Yeah, and in his memoirs there that he posts, same thing. Yeah, good point. Yeah, and luckily, there's really no need for him anyway. I mean, he might have ended up. Who's the presidential aide that got shot? Not presidential. Washington's aide, John.
Oh, John Lawrence. Yep. Mm-hmm. Lauren.
Right, Lauren. Yeah, would have hated to have seen something like that happen to the Light Horse at that point.
Yes, no. And like we said, I think, he's going to go on to have a pretty prominent post-war life of becomes governor of Virginia.
I was thinking when I said he's one of these guys that had the greatest success by the time he hit 26. It's kind of weird to say that when we're talking about still being elected to the governorship and the Congress, and he had a pretty prominent political career for a while, but it's his business failures, his speculation really did him in, and so that really painted that picture for him. But
and he's gonna, he's gonna be tightly aligned, with Washington. And I think after Washington's death, he gives the eulogy for Washington where he says he was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. And then, and you're right, he does, wind up doing pretty poorly managing finances. So they end up leaving, the Lees. And this is after he marries a second wife. And then, his youngest son is Robert Edward Lee, who's born in 1807. And then they end up moving to Alexandria. And then he even has an interesting story after that, because he ends up during the War of 1812. There's up in Baltimore, there's a printer there who's publishing a lot of anti-war materials, and a large crowd comes and gathers to, kind of shut down his press. And Light Horse is there, and he stands up for, freedom of speech. And they, end up, he ends up going to prison, and they end up dragging him out of the jail, and they beat him up and pour wax in his eyes and do all sorts of terrible things to him that kind of really left him probably more physically scarred than anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all bad after that. That's why you mentioned prison. Don't forget the debtor prison episode too, where he was in such financial straits down in Westmoreland County, Stratford Hall, in fact, that he had to spend some time in debtor's jail. That's probably where he wrote a lot of the memoir. Gathering material from everybody and then putting it all together. But it was pretty rough last decade for him, for sure.
Yeah. And then ends up, going down to the Caribbean and leaves his family. And then, on the way back, stays in Georgia, Nathaniel Greene's daughter's place, and ends up passing away there in 1818. And like I said, his son obviously goes on to become, famous Civil War general. And most people then just kind of...
Which son is that?
Robert E. Lee.
Oh yeah, that guy. Oh, I thought we put him to bed. I mean, I thought our goal was to say, hey, there's more to Light Horse Harry Lee than being the father of Robert E. Lee, right?
Correct. Yeah. So then he just kind of goes down as, Light Horse Harry Lee, hero of the Revolution. But that's where I think that this book is really helpful in kind of contextualizing his life as, what does it mean to be a Revolutionary War hero? Well, I mean, just listening to you talk about these episodes, all across the Eastern Seaboard, all of these actions. I mean, it's an amazing story. And even Robert E. Lee thought it was interesting. So, after the Civil War, Robert E. Lee is going to, edit his papers and writes a forward about his service in the Revolution. So I just think that it's really interesting that, it's just too often just summed up as Revolutionary War hero. But what does that really mean? Well, it means this long list of actual actions and,
service.
Service. And I think, talk about the quote, wedded to my sword. I mean, he really was, I would say like a warrior is like a good description of him. I mean, he was just, it seemed like he was built perfectly for it. And obviously was very much in the thick of it throughout the war. So,
and he started right there. He started at Prince William County.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. One of Prince William's own. So.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for coming on here and talking tonight. I want to tell our audience, we got a symposium here in Northern Virginia we're going to be doing in a few months in May. So I hope if you want details for that, check out the blog or check out the Facebook event page. And then in November, we're going to be doing our first bus tour. We're going to be taking people up to the places of the battles of Trenton and Princeton, second weekend of November. So you can find out more information about that on our website as well, or the Facebook page. Really appreciate Mike taking time out of his evening to come talk to us about Light Horse Harry Lee. And we're going to be coming back to you guys again live in 2 weeks. It's going to be the night of the Super Bowl, so we're going to provide some halftime entertainment, probably better than whatever they got lined up for the Super Bowl. So we're gonna be talking about something involved. We know the Buccaneers are going, so maybe talk about privateers or piracy, something along those lines. But we'll just get about that coming up. But thank you, Mike, again for joining us, and stay tuned, everybody.